Okay, part two of lecture one. I took my sweater off so it would seem like it was a completely different person. Okay, so we're going to get into some core sociology here that I think those of you that have had other sociology classes, especially sociology classes with me, will find redundant. But it's always good to have a refresher, right? So the next part of this, section 3, is socialization. How do we know what we know about diversity? How, and more importantly, how do we learn what is normal and what is different? How do we learn what is normal and different when it comes to some of these core categories that we're going to be discussing? Race, ethnicity, gender, and gender identity, which are two separate categories. Sexual orientation, age, ability, nationality, religion, social class status, veteran status, like, you know, there are all these sort of social categories. How do we learn about it? You're not born knowing it. You're not born knowing racism or race, the concept of race. You're not born knowing gender. You might, you know, learn about sex very early, sex and gender being two different things. But these are all things that we learn. And as sociologists, we also like to talk about how where you're born in the world dictates how you learn about that. Did you grow up in a very homogenous environment where everybody was sort of the same? Did you grow up in China or rural Georgia? I mean, one of the things I love white people in the South would say, well, when we grew up, there was only white people, so we couldn't be racist. Like, you know, if there had been somebody to be racist to, we would have. Or did you grow up in a very diverse environment? That can, you know, learn a lot. There are a lot of people that have never had contact with an actual Muslim person. So how do they know about the Islamic faith? There are a lot of people that have never met a Sikh. So how do they know why the men are wearing turbans and growing beards? You know, they just have not had that contact with those people. So where you're born in the world is important to your knowledge of diversity, but also when you're born in the world. Like, things change. America is becoming a more diverse place. So if you talk to someone who's 70, in their 70s, like my parents, right? America was a lot less diverse place. It was mainly WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. You know that? I'm putting it up here on the screen, WASP. You know that acronym, WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But millennials and Generation Z folks grow up in a much more diverse environment. Millennials and Gen Z youth are more likely to speak multiple languages. They're more likely to be spiritual instead of religious. They're more likely to have friends of different gender identity and sexual orientation backgrounds, right? So when you live, and plus, you know, if you live in 2020 versus 1920, right? It's a big difference. 1920 was all about all those Irish, they're all drunk all the time. Like, that was the big issue in 1920. 2020, we've got new diverse issues. So you are the product of your environment. That is the basic sociological mantra that we're starting from. And so how we learn about these differences is something that is learned. And we learn racism, and maybe we can unlearn racism. We learn homophobia, and maybe we can unlearn homophobia. And when we talk about socialization, a term that we often use is we internalize things. We internalize ideas about God, right? I mean, a lot of my discussions are about why is God male? Ding, ding. We internalize ideas about gender. What is, you know, what does it mean to be the dominant sex or the weaker sex, like those things that we used to learn about gender? I mean, we internalize these messages very beauty, right? There's a great example that it seems like very innate in us, our notions of how we are attracted to people. But in fact, that has to do with when and where we grow up. I grew up with a Farrah Fawcett poster on my wall. So imagine where my head was for many years. And I married a Mexican. How did that work? There was a couple blondes before that, though. Stop talking, Randy. So we internalize things, and that includes internalizing ideas about difference, internalizing ideas about power. So one of the concepts we'll talk about in this class is the notion of internalizing white supremacy. That we all, including people of color, internalize a notion about race that puts white people at the top. Internalized patriarchy. We all, including women, internalize the notion that men are the dominant sex, or men are supposed to have power. Internalized homophobia, you know, all these sort of biases that are the product of this life learning that we go through, that we have to unpack. And we kind of learn this in sort of three different ways. And there are different ways we talk about socialization. We talk about role models and sanctions, and a lot of you who have had 204 will remember that. But I'm going to talk about sort of three ways we learn about difference. We are socialized to difference. One is we learn overt messages of difference. We get people telling us about those people. Those people are weird. Those people are different from us. They don't worship the right God. They're uncivilized. They are sick. They are somehow different from us. We're the good people in our in-group. We'll talk about in-group, out-group. In our group, we're the good people, and those people over there, there's something wrong with them. You get really clear messages. As a kid in the South in the 70s, the only thing I heard my father say about homosexual people is that they were sick. Well, they're sick. There's something wrong with them. They're sick. And that seems incredibly biased as it does now, but one of the things that we know is that the American Psychiatric Association defined homosexuality as a mental illness until the late 1960s. It was defined in the DSM as a form of mental illness. So my dad may have been bigoted, but that was the mainstream knowledge, that there was something wrong with that group of people. The more I live, the more I think it's the heterosexuals that are just cuckoo. So, but that may be my bias. So the first is overt messages that we're sort of taught, sort of the us versus them notion of difference. But the other, and probably more common, especially in 2020, are the coded messages about difference. We don't, want to be overtly discriminatory now. That's sort of out of favor. But we can say things about other types of people that you can kind of get the message on. We have a president who's really good at this when he talks about, immigrants. And he's not talking about Canadian immigrants or French immigrants or Norwegian immigrants, which apparently are his favorite. Usually it's about immigrants from south of the border. And it's a very coded way of talking about non-white immigration. Those people. I remember as a kid in my little town of Stone Mountain, Georgia, occasionally we got to go into the big city of Atlanta, the ATL, and Atlanta is a disproportionately African-American city, and when we would drive into the city, my mom would lock the car doors. Because those people, they'll grab you right out of the car, she would say. So, there was this message that black equals danger that I got very early on. They never said, well, they did a little bit, now that I think about it. But, I sort of picked up on this message, including in the media that I watched, that black equals danger, that crime is an urban problem. Don't go into the city. You don't want the problems of the city coming to the suburbs or to the rural areas, because that means black people are going to bring their savage ways. I mean, that's how, the code went with that. So there are the sort of coded messages. And then, so that's the second one. And the third way that we learn about difference is by not discussing it, by omitting categories of people and not knowing about them, that there are other people out there of other sexual orientations. Like, how much do we talk about intersex people? I mean, 1 in 1,000 live births are intersex people, which we used to use the term hermaphroditic, which is, we don't really use that term anymore because, like, snails are hermaphrodites. They're supposed to be like that. I learned that today, that snails have both penises and vaginas. So snail parties must be awesome. But that there are 1 in 1,000, are born with elements of both genders, and so that, but we never talk about it. That's a huge chunk of our population, and so we create a notion of normal versus abnormal by not even talking about different faiths, different gender identities, and things like that. So often we're just sort of leaving out messages about people. And creating this sense of difference by not talking about them, by not talking about the members of our community who are Mormon, for example. Mormons often kind of get left out of the conversation about Christians. They get kind of marginalized as a marginalized Christian faith. Sort of the Latter-day Saints, they're sort of newer versions of Christianity. They get left out. And so if you're not talking about the role that Mormons play in the community, then you're creating a sense of difference when you do encounter Mormons. So we have those sort of three things that we learn through our socialization: overt messages, coded or covert messages, and then omission. Those are the three things. We also learn in this process something that I think is really important to talk about, which is the notion of binaries. We learn a lot of everything's on one side of the line or the other side of the line. It's either black or white and there's no in between. You're either male or female and there's no in between. You're either on God's side or against God's side, and there's no in between. And so we, in learning that, and of course this is how we learn gender, right? Gender, the opposite sexes, that male and female are different sexes, that we learn this idea of zero sum. So binary leads to something called the zero sum game. And if you think about the zero sum game, it's sort of like a teeter-totter or a seesaw. Right? I need a little diagram of a seesaw. And you know how a seesaw works? When one side goes up, the other side goes down. Like, there's no way, it's not like they can both go up or they can both go down. It's pretty much locked in. One side goes up, the other side goes down, and the other side goes down. So the zero-sum thinking leading into the zero sum means if some group gains power, the other group must be losing power. If we're going to define things as binary, let's just use real simple, black and white. We have two categories of people, black and white. We'll leave all the other people, all the brown and yellow and red, and all the other people out for the moment, the biracial people. Just black and white. If black people are gaining power, it must mean on that teeter-totter, in that zero-sum game, that white people are losing power. Or if women are gaining power, it must mean that men are losing power. So we get locked into the binary, which creates this zero-sum dynamic, that one group's gain must mean the oppression of another group. It must mean that people are losing power if this group is gaining power. In fact, we could all gain power equally. And the sort of solution to this in terms of socialization, instead of learning things in a binary, one side or the other, good or evil, right? We have that in the movies, like Star Wars loves the good and evil. Use the dark side of the force. Oh no, I was rooting for the wrong side there. Use the good side of the force, Luke, that's what it is. Instead of the binary, which leads to the zero sum, is to understand complexity. It's not black and white, it's all shades of gray. It's 50 shades of gray plus a few more. That there is lots of contextual elements. Sometimes it is binary and sometimes it's not. Gender is far from binary, right? We were smashing the gender binary. The gender is much more fluid the more we kind of literally take a good hard look at it. And so are all these other categories that we're talking about. Who is an American? Right? Who is an American? I'm not a Native American. I'm not a member of any Native American tribe. Do I really have a right to call myself an American? We'll also talk about that as well. And so understanding complexity is sort of the way to get through this. But learning things in binary triggers the zero-sum game. If they're gaining power, it must mean I'm losing power. If women are gaining power, if gay people are having, gay pride, well, I guess I can't, be proud of being straight. All of a sudden, everything is sort of either or in the zero sum. The other part of this also, and I'm just going to mention this because we ought to come back to it, but we got to mention it at the beginning, is how we also learn scapegoating. How we take, when we do have complex situations, the economy, for example, a pandemic, for example, we need because we're learning things in binary, we need a simple solution. Because complexity is hard. It requires doing homework and reading and doing more than Googling and tweeting. We need a simple way to handle the complexity. So the easiest way to handle that complexity is to blame it on some group of people. When Donald Trump came to power, all our economic problems were blamed on those Mexicans, which also include El Salvadorans and Hondurans and Nicaraguans and Costa Ricans and probably a few Brazilians thrown in there as well. They're the cause of the problem. Instead of the complexity of the globalized economy, it's just, let's blame it on the Mexicans. And of course, this coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing right now, which is all about kind of our global community and our ability to handle public health. And it's a very complex issue. No, it's the China virus. It's the China virus. And so as we've talked about already, we've seen a spike in hate crimes against Chinese and Chinese Americans because it's their fault. They ate a sick monkey. Why don't they eat real food like hamburgers and sushi? So scapegoating ties into that thing that we learn. So one of the things, so the question here about socialization, I don't want to go on too long about this because I think people sort of know, is, we talk about our 5 agents of socialization. We talk about, so remember this, folks, the family, school, religion, our peers, and that's right, the media. Our 5 agents of socialization. Through the life course, we learn, I won't die before this class is over, I swear to Vishnu, we learn these messages about difference. We learn the overt messages through our 5 agents. We learn the coded messages. We learn from the people that we don't learn about, these sort of omitted messages. We learn about the binary, we learn scapegoating, and we internalize these messages through these 5 agents. Our family is the primary one, but we get it at school, including the history that we don't get. I mean, I always think Black History Month, how they try to wedge in Black History Month in February, the shortest and the coldest month of the year, to allow the exclusion of African-American contributions for the rest of the year. And what about the contribution of Indian Americans? I mean, people from India who are Indian, you know, of Indian descent. You know, when do we get to talk about all those people? You know, we really omit so much in education. And of course, from our religious traditions, like how many religions whitewash? You know, Jesus is lily white in every picture I've ever seen of Jesus Christ. Jesus is Christ. Probably not. The kind of historical record would show that he was probably dark-skinned. In fact, the one Roman record about his existence, he was bald and had a hunchback. Looks very different than the nice Jesus Christ, superstar, you know, the Jesus that we get in the movies and on the stained glass window. So religion gives it to us, especially when we talk about gender. Oh, God, religion and gender. And from our peers, from our friends who say, you know, dude, you're a fag. Like, we're going to talk about that whole thing. We get a lot of that message about bias. And, of course, the media reinforces a lot of stereotypes. The media loves it, and the media also loves to omit people. I mean, how many transgender folks, but man, you got a long way to go. So from those 5 agents. So the question here about this section, before we go to the 4th and last section, is if these 5 agents socialize us to learn about difference, are we ever done being socialized? Is this it? Or are we basically, our brains are just now hardwired from all these bad messages about bias and bigotry and power and, you know, either ors and binaries? Or is socialization a lifelong process in which we are still participating in that process? Because if it's not a lifelong process, why the hell are we here? Why are we talking about diversity? It's just done. We just, you know, we're just a bunch of bigots. So that's just the way it is. I learned it on TV and from my dad. So no, I should calm down a little bit. No, we see socialization as a lifelong process. So we're never done. We're never done. I never say, well, I got it. I got it all figured out. I'm done. You don't have to talk to me anymore about these issues. I got it figured out. I had a diversity workshop at my workplace, or I had a lecture about intersectionality in my intro sociology class. I'm done. I got it. Nope. We are not done. We are never done. And again, this is one of the reasons we're reading the D'Angelo book, White Fragility, because it helps us on that journey to unlearn some of the bad messages that we've internalized, including internalizing ideas about white supremacy. So part of this 10-week experiment that we're on is we are going to be socialized and confront our internalized demons around these issues. And maybe we'll come out at the end a little less oppressive. That's the goal, people. That's the bargain that we're entering into. Okay, so that's the issue about socialization. Again, we're going to be coming back to these themes a whole bunch. The last one, and I hope we have time. I hope we have time to do this. Okay, well, yeah, we can do it. Is do we live in a multicultural society? That's the topic. And what do we mean by multiculturalism? I mean, multiculturalism, there is a notion that there are just a lot of cultures or subcultures living in the larger American culture. This includes subcultures based on ethnic origin. I have a Mexican living downstairs, so there's a lot of Mexican culture in this house. I'm talking about mi esposa, my wife. There are a lot of religions, right? It's not just and Protestantism is a whole big umbrella that includes Episcopalians and Presbyterians and Baptists and Methodists, and like there's a whole bunch of different Protestant faiths, but that's just one wing, you know. Then you've got all your Catholics and your Muslims and your Zoroastrians. I mean, there are just so many religions. I mean, we've got so many different of these categories. Are we inherently multicultural? And what does that mean? And if we are inherently multicultural, if that's just the picture of America, e pluribus unum, right? That's our motto as a nation, e pluribus unum, out of many one. then what's the problem, right? We're just a multicultural. The question would then be, why is there such a backlash against multiculturalism? In 2020, there is an intense backlash against multiculturalism. I would just encourage you, and I'll flash some images up here as I talk, to Google image anti-multiculturalism, and you come up with all kinds of things that say multiculturalism is destroying America, multiculturalism is a Jewish plot, multiculturalism is leading to white genocide, multiculturalism is shoving Islam down the throats of Christians. I mean, you just, all this kind of stuff is part of the backlash against multiculturalism, which is why classes like this exist, so we can not solve the problem, but we can kind of dive into the problems and see what's underlying them. Okay. I'm going to lay this out. This is a really important thing. I talk about this in my 204 class, and I'm going to kind of touch on it here to really understand what is the challenge around multiculturalism. And that has to do with the two values that we have in America. The two values that try to balance out what we want to do around all this difference that we have. The first value is assimilation. This is what we call the melting pot value, that we want to assimilate. A pluribus unum sort of implies that all these different people come and then they assimilate into a common culture, American. They're no longer Irish American. They're American, no longer Italian American. They're American, no longer African American. They're American, no longer Chinese American. They're American. Everybody sort of blends into this one culture. But, each one, there's a but. There's a couple of buts coming up. But the downside of that is assimilating to what? It really means, assimilation means assimilating to a WASP, meaning white Anglo-Saxon Protestant standard. It means changing your religion to the dominant religion. My grandfather, I come from a long line of Catholics from Czechoslovakia, became Presbyterian because that's how you fit in. There is a little bit more to the story than that. That's when he met my grandmother. But he, you know, assimilated to the dominant religion, stopped speaking Czech, started speaking English. So you're culturally assimilating to the dominant religion. It might mean you get rid of some of your cultural traditions. And you want to eat hamburger and apple pie and all the things that Americans eat and leave the strange food of your culture behind, so you assimilate that way. You may physically assimilate. You may lighten your skin, may round your eyes, straighten your hair, and do everything you can to look more white, right? Assimilation is becoming more like the dominant category. And so if you're in the dominant category, that's awesome because everybody wants to be like me. So look at these people all trying to look like me and pray like me and eat like me and talk like me in the King's English. And, you know, that's great. But the downside of that is a lot of people are losing their cultural identity. They're losing their diversity, right? They're losing the thing that makes them unique as they assimilate. I once saw Abbie Hoffman, the great 60s radical, talk, and he said, if America's a melting pot, a lot of people are getting burned. Meaning people of color, people of other faiths outside of Protestantism, you know, are having to be more and more. And I think those of you who are in this class who come from non-WASP traditions know exactly what I'm talking about. How you try to fit in, right? How do you try to fit in linguistically, culturally, fashionly, is that a word? One of my favorite scenes about this is in the movie Selena. See, it's already the first lecture. I'm always talking about Jennifer Lopez. Selena, where Selena's, you know, and Selena was a Tex-Mex. She was a Chicana woman, popular singer, was really great. I won't sing, but I could. Where her father is saying, you know, we're kind of screwed because for white Americans, we'll never fully be American, and for Mexicans, we'll never be fully Mexican. We're sort of this in-between, you know, this sort of hybrid of assimilated Chicano. This is a big deal for my wife, who's from Mexico. She's a Mexican citizen. She's like, don't call me a Chicana. I'm not a Chicana. Our daughter, though, is a Chicana. Because she wants to hold on to her Mexican heritage. Okay, so that's the first part, is assimilation. The other part of this is what we call pluralism. And pluralism, the other value, is our diversity value. Pluralism is, we celebrate diversity. We like the fact there are so many different people in this country. It keeps things interesting, keeps people fed, all the different types of food. I have to think, did you know that there are people in this country that have never had Thai food? Like, what the hell is wrong with these people? And if you're not ordering Thai while you're locked down in this, in this quarantine, what the hell are you eating? I mean, we had so much Thai over the last 2 weeks. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to reduce the whole Thai population to pad Thai and massaman curry. Yeah. Anyway, we love the diversity. We love the fact that there are all these different cultures, and it makes things so much more interesting. When everybody's exactly the same, let me tell you, having hung out with white supremacists, when you get a bunch of people who look and think, hanging out together all the time, boring. Besides the fact that they're hateful Nazis, also boring. We love to mix it up. But, here's the second but, that we love diversity, but to maintain that diversity, you got to put some boundaries up. You got to say, hey, I'm going to have a Chinatown. Isn't it cool that San Francisco has this great Chinatown? But that means non-Chinese people cannot live here because we want to maintain the China-ness of Chinatown. If I'm trying to preserve the ethnic identity of my family, that means I need to make sure that I marry and have children with someone who's the same as me. Because if I marry someone else, my children will only be half of me, half of my ethnic identity, and they will assimilate and will lose the thing that makes us diverse. I mean, this has been a big issue with Native Americans. Native Americans were forced into assimilation. They were taken off their land, and the boys had their hair chopped, and they were put in boarding schools and said, you're going to learn to speak English, you're going to worship the way that we worship, and you're going to basically become white people, even though we won't fully allow you to be white because you're not. And so how do those people preserve their ethnic identity, their diversity, other than put up some walls and say, no, 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 no. We are going to discriminate to make sure that we preserve our diversity. So the other side of the ledger is we celebrate pluralism, we celebrate diversity, but to do that, you have to put up some boundaries to prevent assimilation. The best way to think about this is diversity undoes assimilation, and assimilation undoes diversity. And you know what? We love both of them. That's why America is a little bit crazy about around these issues around diversity, because we can't quite figure out how to do both. How do you assimilate and celebrate diversity at the same time? And so that's one of the reasons there's this big pushback, is they want people to assimilate to the white standard. And when people say, no, I'm going to put up some boundaries and say black pride, brown pride, yellow pride, red pride, and I'm going to kind of create some boundaries to say, hey, we want to maintain what makes us unique. And the white people are like, whoa, wait, no, you're supposed to want to be like us, and you're undoing the thing that is America, which is the melting pot. And the reality is, it's both. It's both things are happening. They create this natural tension. So this is one of the reasons classes like this are important, because we have to look at this natural tension from these two values of pluralism and assimilation, and how do we manage them and here's the kicker, how do we manage these two values and not traumatize people, especially people who have been traditionally and historically marginalized by the value of assimilating people into the white wasp pool. That is the theme of this class. That is the theme of this class. So we're gonna be coming back and weaving this through throughout the whole quarter, this notion of assimilation versus pluralism, and we're especially gonna kind of try to dovetail it in with the discussion about white fragility. We're gonna extend white fragility to talk about male fragility and hetero fragility and cisgender fragility and able-bodied fragility and middle-aged fragility, all kinds of fragilities. We're gonna try to be a little less fragile. Okay, that's all I have to say today, now that Elvis is about empty. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everybody, or as many people as possible, on our little Zoom chat. Hopefully it will work. Ding! Well, that means I'm out of time. Okay, thanks everybody. That's our first week worth lecture. Hopefully you're getting the books and reading, and I'll be sending out some more emails, so... Ding. Oh my gosh, I'm getting all kinds of messages. I'll see you in the Zoom room. Come on, a Zoom, 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 Zoom.